If you like our short stories, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. The Bone Garden Hartsville was known for its gardens. People came from all over to see them. The lush roses, sunflowers that stood taller than most men, peonies and tulips that seemed to bloom brighter and more vibrant than anywhere else in the world. The flowers were the pride of the town, tended with care and devotion by everyone who lived there. Every home had a garden, every street lined with blossoms in full bloom, their perfume thick in the air, almost suffocating at times. Some said you could smell the flowers long before you entered Hartsville, as if the town was trying to pull you in. But Hartsville had another tradition, one that wasn't advertised on postcards or shared with outsiders, a ritual that ensured the gardens never stopped growing. Sophie had grown up in Hartsville, but she had never fully understood the town's darker secret. The lottery was a tradition held every year on October 1st, just as the leaves began to fall and the air cooled for autumn. The smell of decaying leaves mixed with the overpowering fragrance of flowers always made Sophie feel queasy. No one talked about what happened after the lottery, not to the children at least. To Sophie, it was a game, like the raffle drawings at school fairs. You hoped your family wouldn't be chosen, but if they were, well, that was just the way it went. Life carried on, at least that's what she thought. She remembered when her friend Melanie's family had been chosen 2 years ago. The atmosphere around town had shifted when the lottery results were announced. Sophie noticed Melanie's parents started to act strange, more distant, quieter, but everyone else had carried on like normal. Melanie stopped coming to school a few days before Halloween, and her family's house, once filled with laughter, became silent. The garden there grew wild and unruly, the flowers almost too large, too vibrant, as if they were feeding on something more than soil. Her parents explained it away as the family moving for a job in another town. Sophie hadn't believed it, but she didn't push. After all, no one really questioned what happened to the chosen families. It was just one of those things adults knew but didn't talk about, at least not to the younger generation. But that year, things changed for Sophie. When her father pulled the slip of paper from the black velvet bag on October 1st and turned it over to reveal the number 17, Sophie's world began to unravel. She watched his face turn pale, saw her mother's hand tremble as she squeezed his arm. The crowd in the town square murmured quietly, but no one seemed surprised. Sophie could feel the air shift, thick with unease, the way it had when Melanie's family had been chosen. The flowers around the square seemed to lean toward them, as if they were waiting. Only this time it was her family. The mayor gave his usual speech, the same one Sophie had heard every year since she was a child. Your family will honor Hartsville by making the ultimate sacrifice at the Great Bloom Festival. Thanks to your gift, our gardens will continue to flourish, and Hartsville will remain a place of beauty and prosperity. The words sent a chill down her spine. As the speech went on, Sophie couldn't help but glance at the flowers surrounding them, the roses blooming unnaturally fast, petals fluttering to the ground like drops of blood. That night, Sophie sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping the edge of her chair, while her parents whispered in the living room. They thought she couldn't hear them, but she caught snippets of the conversation. Words like ritual, necessary, and for the good of the town. But beneath the rehearsed phrases, Sophie could hear the fear in their voices, feel the tremor in their words. But Sophie had questions no one had ever answered. Why did chosen families leave without a word? What really happened at the Great Bloom Festival on Halloween night? Why did people treat it like some grand honor but act like it was a death sentence? She was done being in the dark. The next morning, after her parents had left for work, Sophie decided to find the answers herself. She started in the town library, combing through old town records, but found nothing. The festival was mentioned, the lottery, the gardens, but no mention of what the sacrifice truly was. It was as if the town had scrubbed its history clean. Even the oldest records were carefully worded, leaving out crucial details. Sophie's frustration mounted as she left the library empty-handed. There had to be someone in this town who knew the truth, someone who would tell her. As she walked the quiet streets, an idea sparked in her mind. Hilda. Hilda was the town's oldest resident, a woman who lived in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of Hartsville, hidden behind walls of ivy and tangled vines. No one talked about her much. Some said she was crazy, that she'd lost her mind after her own family had been chosen in the lottery decades ago. But Hilda wasn't like everyone else in town. She was a relic of a time when people questioned things. Sophie hesitated outside Hilda's gate, unsure of what she might find. The gate was overgrown with wildflowers, their sickly sweet scent suffocating in the autumn air. She could almost feel the flowers watching her, but she was done being afraid. She knocked on the door, her knuckles brushing against the cracked wood. The door creaked open, revealing a thin, frail woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through Sophie. "You're the one they picked this year," Hilda said, her voice low and raspy. Sophie's heart thudded in her chest. "How did you—" "I know because I've seen it happen too many times," Hilda interrupted, stepping aside to let Sophie in. "You're here because you want to know the truth, aren't you?" Sophie nodded, her throat dry. She stepped into the dimly lit house, the smell of old books, dust, and something else, something coppery like blood, filling the air. Hilda gestured for her to sit at a small, cluttered table. "They don't tell the children anymore," Hilda said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "They think it's easier that way. Better not to scare the young ones. But ignorance doesn't protect you from what's coming." "What's coming?" Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hilda sighed. "The lottery isn't just a game, Sophie, it's a death sentence." Hilda told Sophie everything. The town's leaders had kept the ritual alive for centuries, dating back to a time when Hartsville was barren, when crops wouldn't grow and families starved. The legend was that a druid had come to the town and offered them a way out, a ritual sacrifice of one family every year, their blood feeding the earth, ensuring the gardens would grow and the town would thrive. The people were desperate, so they agreed. And for a while it worked. The crops flourished, the gardens bloomed, and the town grew wealthy. But over time, the town no longer needed to rely on the land. Food could be brought in from other places, and farming wasn't necessary anymore. The gardens, though, those gardens had become the town's treasure. The flowers were unnaturally beautiful, enhanced by the blood of the sacrificed families. Tourists came from all over to see the miraculous blooms, bringing in money that made the town's leaders rich. The townspeople believed they were still making sacrifices to keep the crops growing, but the truth was far worse. The sacrifice was only for appearances, to make sure the flowers stayed perfect, to ensure Hartsville remained a tourist destination. "They kill for flowers," Hilda said, her voice dripping with disgust. "And your family is next." Sophie's mind reeled as she walked back home, the weight of Hilda's words pressing down on her chest. Her family had no idea what was coming. They had spent their entire lives believing in the town's traditions, trusting that the leaders knew what was best. They had no clue they were about to be killed for the sake of the gardens, and no one would stop it unless she did. Halloween night came, and with it the Great Bloom Festival. The town square was transformed into a spectacle of lights, flowers, and eerie decorations. Pumpkins lined the streets, their carved faces grinning ominously in the flickering candlelight. The overwhelming scent of flowers was thick in the air, mixing with the smoky bonfires, turning the night into a haze of color and scent. Sophie stood among the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent the last few days gathering evidence, documents proving that the food had been outsourced for decades, records showing how the town's leaders had profited from the ritual while keeping everyone else in the dark. She could barely think over the stench of the flowers, their perfume clawing at her lungs. She saw her parents standing near the bonfire, laughing with friends, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The crowd cheered as the mayor took the stage, his voice booming over the festivities. "Tonight, we celebrate the beauty and prosperity of our town. Thanks to the sacrifice made by our chosen family, Hartsville will continue to flourish. Our gardens will continue to bloom, and we will remain a beacon of beauty and prosperity." Sophie's stomach churned. She had to stop it. She had to make them see the truth. "Wait," she shouted, pushing her way through the crowd. All eyes turned toward her as she climbed onto the stage, her hands shaking as she held up the documents. "The sacrifices aren't about keeping the land fertile," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The crops don't matter. The flowers don't need blood to grow. This is all about money." The crowd murmured, confused. The mayor's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, waving her off. "Sophie, this isn't the time. It's the only time," Sophie interrupted, her voice rising. "You've been lying to everyone. The sacrifices aren't for the land, they're for you. The leaders get rich from the tourists who come to see the gardens, and they use our families as pawns to keep it going." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sophie held up the documents, reading from the proof she had gathered. The outsourcing of food, the profits from the gardens, the manipulation of the town's history. It all spilled out, and the crowd grew angrier with every word. "You've been killing people for nothing," someone shouted. The mayor's face drained of color. "That's enough." "No," Sophie said, stepping forward, her voice steady now. "It's not enough. You've lied to all of us, and it ends tonight." The townspeople, dressed in their Halloween costumes, began to close in, their faces dark with realization. The air crackled with tension as the truth finally broke through the surface. The mayor, seeing the growing fury in the crowd, began to back away, his smile gone. "This is for the good of the town," he said, his voice wavering. "It's necessary." "No, it's not," Sophie said, her voice ringing through the square. The crowd surged forward. Sophie's heart pounded as chaos erupted around her. The townspeople turned on the leaders, dragging them down from the stage, shouting accusations and demanding answers. The bonfires roared higher, the flames licking the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the scene. For the first time, Hartsville was tearing itself apart. Finally, the truth had been unearthed, and it was more terrible than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, the sun rose over Hartsville, and the gardens were as beautiful as ever. The sacrifice hadn't happened, and yet the flowers still bloomed. The town had been freed from its dark tradition, and the people had taken control of their future. Sophie stood at the edge of the town square, watching the petals sway gently in the breeze. For the first time in generations, the town was free from the lies that had held it captive. But not everything was settled. She knew that some in town would resist change, that some still clung to the old ways, believing the ritual had saved them. There would be battles ahead, but the truth was out now, and the town would never be the same. As her family prepared to leave Hartsville behind, Sophie glanced back one last time. The gardens still glowed in the morning light, no longer fed by blood, but still somehow beautiful. The flowers hadn't died. The town hadn't withered. The only thing that had withered was the fear that had held them all in chains for so long.